Good morning and welcome to the February 14th, 2025 Finance Committee meeting of the Lee Summit School District. We'll begin with item 1.01, contracts $15,000 and less. The items that are presented are typical for this time of the year, wrapping up this school year. Also, there are items on this list that are preparing for next school year. Fairly standard items that are on this list. Are there any questions? Right. Hearing no questions, we'll move on to item 1.02, contracts $15,000 and greater. All of the items on this list will be discussed in this meeting with the exception of the one-year extension to the YMCA MOU. There's no cost to the district for this agreement. We've been in a relationship with the YMCA to provide before and after school care services for probably 5-6 years at this point. And this is just a one-year extension onto this agreement. So moving on to item 1.03, Career and Technical Education Enhancement Grant, FY 2026. And we have Mrs. Booth here to present this agenda item. Mrs. Booth.
Yes, hi, good morning. The Career Technical Education Enhancement Grant is a state-funded grant to help with the cost of equipment, curriculum, all of the things that comes with putting on a career and technical education program. This year, well, actually for next year, the total grant will be $541,871.53, and that is to help with the cost of equipment and software, computers, things like that through almost all of our program areas across the district. And this is secondary only, so in our high schools and at Summit Tech. And our district match of that would then be $239,988.44. Does anyone have any questions?
Right. Mrs. Booth, thank you.
Thank you.
Moving on to 1.04, NE Network for Educator and Effectiveness Renewal Agreement. Dr. Carlson.
Yes, this item is a Human Resource Department, works with University of Missouri with the Network for Educator Effectiveness. This is the tool that we use for primarily our teachers, but some other certified positions as well. It's a research-based tool, and this is our renewal. We've worked with this group for about 10 years now, and we were actually, Lee Summit was a part of the start of the design of this resource for school districts in the state of Missouri. So happy to answer any questions.
Dr. Carlson, thank you. Moving on to Section 2, Facilities. Mr. Gorell.
Thank you. Got 3 items on the agenda today, and if it's okay, I'd like to talk through the first 2 items together. They're related to the same project. The second item, we'll start with the design services, is a contract with Langford Fendler Engineers. The district has an on-call contract with them to help manage our long-range mechanical plan and do the design and construction observation for our projects. So the next project up that we are wanting to perform this summer is equipment replacement at Meadow Lane Elementary School. It is some really old equipment. It's original air conditioning equipment from the building. Langford Fendler looked at those units, and it's a very unique scenario. They were installed, they're 30 years old, and so the cost to tear them off and do something different was significantly more. And so we are recommending a retrofit of the penthouses that are up there. and it's a significant savings, and we feel like we'll have a great life cycle. So because of that decision, it did limit our equipment options to two manufacturers that could provide the right combination of equipment. And so we reached out to the two of them on cooperative purchasing and got bids for the equipment. This is the equipment that is a long lead item. We will be bidding later in the spring the installation of the equipment. So we estimate the total project cost to be about $1.4 million. And the low bid for the equipment was $433,000. So I'll be glad to answer any questions you may have.
Mr. Gurrell, I did have a quick question. I was just curious. I saw the note on the item regarding not doing the warranty, and I was just curious what was behind that decision.
Yeah, they are. So these are separate condensers that sit outside a multi-zone kind of a doghouse unit, and all that's in the condenser it is a compressor and the fans, and there's some electronics. But we talked with our HVAC guys and looked at the cost of those materials. First of all, the compressors have a 5-year warranty from the manufacturer already. And we just didn't feel like it was really worth the value. We could replace a lot of condenser fans for that kind of money. So just didn't see the value in it for the types of equipment that we're buying.
Gotcha. Makes sense. Thank you.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Okay, if there are no other questions, I'll move on to the next item. This is related to mobile classroom lease for Cedar Creek Elementary. Cedar Creek is at capacity. And, as we've done many times in the past, one of our standard methods of handling capacity issues for the short term is providing mobile classroom space. We have many years ago adopted the strategy of using leases so that we don't get stuck owning the buildings and having to deal with getting rid of them. We don't want them to be a long-term solution. So we reached out to 3 companies that are all on co-ops just to get competitive bids. And the low bid that we received was from Palomar. We have worked with Palomar in the past. They're a good company and have a good product and are happy with the service they provide. So I will be glad to answer any questions that you have. The total 2-year cost for this item is just over, let me open it, just over $100,000, $105,000.
Mr. Gurrell, just out of curiosity, because I am ignorant and don't know, what does it cost to purchase one of those to own them, to own them outright?
I didn't specifically get numbers. We'd probably estimate it'd be at least twice that cost.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
And then the logistics of trying to do something with it if you don't need it anymore and maintain it and things like that. Is that kind of the reasoning behind not wanting to just buy it?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. We
Thank
get
you.
stuck with old buildings that, and we have, gosh, I don't remember the exact number. We've got about 6 or 7 of them around the district that trying to figure out what to do with right now anyway.
Oh, that we own?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So are they in use, or is that something that could be moved to Cedar Creek?
They are not used for classroom space, and
Oh, I see.
they're not in they're old wood structures, wood siding, and are not in the kind of condition that you'd want to try to move them.
Understood.
Yeah.
Gotcha. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. You're welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Grill. Moving on to section 3, finance, Mr. Holder.
Good morning, everyone. The first item we have here is something that we've been previewing for a few months in advance, but we are taking it for approval this month. This is part of a project really we started last year and are continuing this year to defease a portion, and this is not all of the remaining portion, but we're getting very close to the remaining portion of our 2016 general obligation bonds. And just a quick reminder, this is a defeasance, which really in layman's terms is like a prepayment on your loan. And so just like when you prepay a car loan or a home loan, you have the opportunity to save some future interest costs. And so we have the room in our debt service balance. Of course, we have payments that come March 1st for debt service, and this is part of that, but then we would be able to pay an additional $6 million to get very close to closing this bond out. And in fact, I would anticipate that next year we would at least be able to consider that if we want to do that. So as the item says, this was originally going to mature in 2032. And so by paying this off early, we are able to save just a little bit over $1.6 million in interest costs. And then ultimately, big picture, as we know, we have a bond issue at the ballot in April. And this, obviously in 2025, but even it's thinking beyond that, 2030, 2035, doing this just helps our capacity and our capabilities down the road for future issues. So any questions on this defeasance?
Mr. Holder, I don't have any questions, but I just want to thank you for your due diligence in bringing up recommendations like this, because I know this is not the first time that we've done this in the last couple of years, and I know it saves the district and our taxpayers a lot of money. So thank you for bringing this recommendation.
Yes, thank you. It's always nice to prepay. All right, we'll move on to the transfer of funds. So January was more of a typical month. We saw this very similar in December. Not a lot of extra Fund 2 revenue that comes in, so more of a normal transfer. So our transfer from the general fund to the special revenue this month will be $5,207,592.05. All right, moving on to the treasurer's report. We'll start with our revenue and expense report. Through January, January, of course, marks 7 out of 12 months in the fiscal year, but it also marks, a pretty important month in terms of our local revenue collection. We start to see that in December, but really January is where we receive quite a bit of the bulk of that revenue. And so by the end of January, you have a little bit of an idea of where you're headed. And then over the next 2 months, really from a local revenue standpoint, because you get the M&M revenue, we should receive that this month. And by the end of March, what you receive after that point from the local standpoint is very, very minor. So overall, if we start looking at our revenue in the operating fund, you'll notice that our percentages come back very close to where we were at this point last year. Now, obviously, last year we had the gap in revenue from what we were anticipating from that local tax collection. And we know the large majority of that was just appeals that were settled between when we received our final certification in July and when taxes were actually collected 6 months later in December. So we have that gap. We have closed that gap this year. And so February is going to be a very important month. We have 4 collections. We've already had one. We may get an email. No, this is Friday. We should get an email today with the amount of collection that we will have. And then we'll have 2 more. Where we sit at the end of February, I think will be very telling. I'm hopeful this year we're going to be much closer to the anticipated revenue that we should see in the general revenue fund, which ultimately at the end of the day, what that means is when you look at this, The $30.5 million that we have left to receive. Now, local is not the only way that we get revenue into Fund One, but we'll come much closer to fulfilling that revenue estimate. Special Revenue Fund. This is an area that possibly next month, it may not be until March that we see it, which means it would be the April Finance Committee meeting. But we have went ahead and sent in an estimate for our average daily attendance. Now, overall, average daily attendance, we anticipate that to be lower than it was last year. But because of the waiting for free and reduced lunch, that threshold being lowered, as well as limited English proficiency, we received some weights. We've never before received that. And what I mean by weights is it adds ADA to the calculation. So what that means, and you've heard me talk about this for several months, our special revenue fund has lagged in terms of, if you look at where we are this year compared to last year, you see we're down over 2% in terms of that collection. Once we get that payment, once they process our estimate, we should see that come back and be very close. Now, it's not going to be a windfall. I'm not going to be able to raise that revenue estimate a lot, but it should get us right back on track and maybe a little bit better than where we are anticipated to be right now from a revenue standpoint. So I know I've mentioned that, several times, especially as we've seen that gap widen in the percentages. But if not next month, then certainly when we have our April Finance Committee, we should see that number get back to a good spot. Debt service, you notice their revenues. That obviously you can see the bulk of the collection that's come in. We've got over 86% of those. That number will continue to rise. Bond, of course, is finished for now. Capital projects, that number even ticked up a little bit as we compare it to December, where that number will really rise. When we have our meeting next month, you should see that go up, probably get over the $10 million mark, because that is, we place the bulk of our merchants and manufacturing revenue in there. And we typically receive that in February. So we should see that number go up. And we need it in the capital projects fund, as you know. Moving over to nutrition services, I just want to highlight that we have finally received all of our nutrition services revenue. If you remember, we were lagging in payments from the state. So what you see there is actually what we should have received through the end of January. And so we're trending much closer to where we thought we would be at this time of the year. I will note that AMI days do have an impact. We've had 5 AMI days this year. The one area of revenue that does impact is food service revenue, because that's an area that, obviously we're doing virtual learning. And so, whereas now we're making up days on the end, so in theory, we will have meals to serve those days. With AMI, you do not. So, but the revenue there is much closer to where we thought it would be. And remember, we always lag a month there. So what we receive in June will actually be with our May breakfast and lunch payment, which, that's looking like we're going to be in for most of the month of May. So June should be fairly healthy compared to past years. Activity, again, trending, very close to where we would expect it to be. Just a reminder, I say this often, but it just bears remembering, activity and certainly the foundation that we couple with that. Those are not meant to be revenue generators. In theory, those are revenue and expense neutral, which means over time they will even out. And you really see that, in our current budget update, and it usually is that way throughout the year. Our revenue will be up a little bit compared to expenses. There are months that it can be down, but over time it just remains the same. And that is it as anticipated. I do want to highlight, we've been talking about this for a long time in our before and after school services. We finally reached the tipping point in a good way, that our revenues have come in and we have an actual positive balance in our before and after school services fund. That's the first time in my little over 3.5 years here that's been the case. And really, in almost 5 years since that's been the case. So, positive there, and that does impact our overall fund balance at the end of the year. Very minor portion, the revenues and expenses coming out of there are not huge, but it still impacts it in a positive way. All right, going down to look at the expenses. I want to highlight this, and as I look at when to do a budget amendment, so the earlier they happen in the year, sometimes they do happen early, sometimes they happen later. Typically, when they happen later, that can be a good thing. And so I am waiting on a budget amendment. Now, we very likely will do one at our March meeting after I see February come in. But there's really two main reasons for that. One, we've already talked about. I want to see another month of revenue. I'd really like to see the state revenue get estimated. So there is a chance we might do it at the April meeting. And I want to see the February local collection along with the M&M. The other reason is expenses. And we are really trending in the operating fund in a positive way. And this is after taking some hits expense-wise in December and January. You've heard me talk about the music, the insurance bill that was more than anticipated. We've absorbed all of those expenses to date, and we're still 0.7% below where we were at this time last year. And as I trend it out, we still have a decent cushion in the operating fund. It's slimmer than it was, but it's still there. Special revenue. Again, I continue to monitor this, but as it compares to last year, and last year we had to adjust up, I anticipate we'll have to raise our expense budget just a little bit in special revenue, but we still have a decent cushion as I again trend out the last 5 months. So I do think I think it bears watching. Let's see what happens into February. And my hope is, really in both of those areas that maybe whatever we do in special revenue fund, we won't need to do in operating. But if we do something, it will be very minor. Debt service, again, we'll have the big expenses come out next month with the defeasance. So we have about 23 million that was scheduled to come. We have the 6 million that will be added to that. And when we look at the balance sheet, I'll show you the balance in our debt service and where we are able to absorb that. Capital projects, we did finally go over. This is the one area that no matter what, we would have to do a budget amendment because of this. And we knew that. We've had several items that have come up. So we will make that amendment whenever we end up, whether it's in the March meeting or the April meeting. And by the way, we will not wait till May. We will do it either in March or April for a budget amendment. But capital projects will certainly be part of that. Nutrition services, we're trending okay there. You'll notice the gap. It's about a $500,000 gap. I do expect us to close that slightly between now and the end of the year, but that is something that we will continue to watch. There's always a little bit of a lag, especially with summer school when we receive those revenues. Over time, it catches up. But I will be watching that fund, really as we move through the remaining 5 months. It's not really trending any worse or better than I expected. It's just something that bears watching. Activities, you can see expenses very close to revenues as we would anticipate. And then we've talked about before and after school care, and where we are there. From an expense standpoint, we might raise that slightly, but the revenues will more than make up for that if we do it. Going down to the bottom right, you can see where we stand there with our current fund balances in all of the areas of the restricted funds, and of course with before and after school, we see a positive number there, which is nice. Bottom left, you see our operating fund balance. You can see that, overall, there's been some months where this has been a heavier gap. We are closer in terms of where we were in the last few months in terms of operating fund balances, but 120 million, that is a good spot. Now remember, we're kind of at the peak right now. End of February should be very close, because we'll get some merchants manufacturing. We still have decent local revenue that comes in. But end of January, end of February is our peak for that fund balance, and then it will slowly start to go down until we get to next December, and then it will start popping back up again. Any questions on the revenue and expense report? All right, investment report. I just want to highlight there, you see the items that are coming off. We've mentioned this in the past few months, but some coupon rates there that are low compared to what we can get. I do just want to note, we've had several callable bonds or agencies that have been called, which is not surprising. And so as we look to reinvest those, we are looking to get away from that, just in the short term, to get a little bit more consistency. And so as you see this report next month, we'll actually have, we're not adding investment dollars to it, but when we have items that are called, we're just reinvesting them. And we're really looking at treasuries. And the main purpose of our UBS investments are really to be able to grab investments that are longer than a year or 2 years. We're capped at 5 years by state statute, but you will see us layer in some investments that go out 3, 4, even a 5 year. They're all over 4%. And we feel like that's a good number. If we can lock it in, we'll lock it in. And so this is more of our longer term. MOSIP and MOCAT allow us to be a little bit more nimble and flexible. Sometimes those short-term rates, well, in here recent past, that has been the case. In fact, there was a long time where liquid was the best interest rate you could get. So we continue to monitor that, but we can be a little bit more nimble in MOSIP and MOCAT to get those shorter term investments that instead of being at a 4.3 or a 4.4, they may be at a 4.7 or a 4.8. But we're going to go ahead and start locking in investments that are over 4%. And that'll set us up good with a steady, stream of income over the next 3 or 4 years. Any questions on that? All right. Last of all, we'll just highlight the balance sheet quickly. And the one item that I had mentioned earlier that I just wanted to point out, if you look at our debt service fund at the very bottom, you see the balance there of just over 38 million. And we will add to that slightly, basically just on what comes in, between February 1st and June 30th from local tax collection. But I mentioned the $23 million in debt service. We're going to add the $6 million to that. We will still end the fiscal year with over $10 million in our debt service fund. So which, is lower than you will definitely see it some years, but still has a nice, healthy balance. And with our debt structure, the other item that will be nice is, certainly hoping and planning on a successful April bond election is we're going to have the opportunity to really layer in and pay off some portions of that very early over the next 5 years. And given that we're starting to get into an environment where those short-term interest rates are better than longer term, which historically is usually the case, but we're getting away from the inverted curve. The timing of that is really good in the bond market. Other funds, again, as you see, capital projects, we've talked about that. That is actually improved because of the local tax collection that we received, and then merchants and manufacturing will put a big dent in that. So as we look at this next month, it will improve. But finally, our transfer that we make in June will be what gets that back in the black. Any questions on the balance sheet? All right, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Holder. Moving on to section 4, future agenda items. As you look at this document, and once again, just as a refresher, this document is prepared and designed to help our board and our public know and understand the agenda items, the contracts and agreements, the projects that we are bringing forward in the future. You can see that a lot of work is being done to prepare for March. And as we speak, a lot of these items are being worked on to prepare for that March board meeting, even though it's still, a month or so away. So, and then April's coming, and then we have some other items that we want to bring in the spring, just not specific as to when we're going to bring those. Are there any questions about any of the items that are on this list? Not hearing any questions. I think that concludes our meeting for today. Board Member Eslick, Board Member Haley, anything that you need from us at this time?
No, I
I
think,
don't, Michelle and Mr. Holder, thank you very much for your presentations.
yes, thank you.
All right, that concludes our meeting for today. Thank you.